Alright, so it's been a little over a year since I quit my corporate job and stumbled into the world of adult gap yearing, if that's a word. But I wanted to share some of my key takeaways and some lessons that I've learned that I thought were super insightful. And to give a little background as to who I am, I used to be a designer at an ad agency, and so that's kind of where, this will stem from. And if you're curious to hear more, let's dive right in and let's get lucid. Alright, so I switched on over to my laptop camera and to a format that we're all familiar with. This is the Zoom format. This is 2020 and 2021, very fitting for those 2 years because we communicated primarily on these platforms. So, without further ado, this is my takeaway from my adult gap year, and I'll go over my highlights and then my lowlights. But to start, lesson number 1 would probably be, doors lead to other doors, but of course they do. So it's probably more so that things connect to other things, and especially, I'm thinking of it in terms of if you're afraid of doing something, but you really want to do it, just do it. So that's kind of lesson number 1. And so to start off, in my adult gap year, I created more YouTube videos, and I've been meaning to do that because I always do want to share what I've learned with other people, because for myself, I'm like, I wish, a younger version of me knew the things that I knew now. So that's kind of why I do, YouTube. And that actually led me to being invited as a speaker for ACC, which is the Asian Creative Collective. And one of the founders, Susanna, actually contacted me and she invited me to speak on my career journey. And of course, when I received that invite in my Instagram DMs, I was like, "Oop, is that me?" Just because there's part of me that has self-doubt, and this is scary, but also I really want to be able to share my takeaways. So knowing the intention behind why I wanted to do it actually helped me, so that I was like, all right, despite your nervousness, you're gonna do it. And I did it, and I was really proud of myself for doing it. So for me, that was a major win, because afterwards I was just like, yo, you accomplished something that you were really scared and afraid of doing. And I also got some people, messaging me and saying they really enjoyed the story / takeaways. So for me, I was like, yes, I did well. So another thing that I did that was scary and really nerve-wracking was, this is before my presentation, but I actually did an interview with NBC Snapchat stories, and that's obviously really intimidating because that's in front of like a lot of people, but I did it because I was like, I'm really afraid. And in it, I just talked about how even though 2020 isn't the best year, I still found ways in which I could feel like I was thriving because I felt like I had control. And one of the main things of that was creating works, right? And so with that, after I finished doing that, I was like, oh, that wasn't too bad. I'm alive and I survived. So jumping back to my presentation, some of the things that I put in my presentation was that I created a face filter, and that face filter actually got itself onto the Instagram gallery effect page. So that was really cool because obviously a lot of people see that and they get to use it. And I think that was the coolest part, where I saw, not because I see my face with that filter on a lot of the times, but seeing other people's faces on that filter was just really cool to see. And in addition to that, the other neat thing that I was a part of was I got an Adobe Creative Grant, and these two things will actually relate. So the face filter and the Adobe Creative Grant, that leads into Skillshare. And that's because for my Skillshare class, I taught a class on how to create face filters. And of course, I used, my Pride face filter as a prime example of the cool things that happens when you create face filters, or that can happen. And for myself, creating a Skillshare class was something that I've always wanted to do. So when I had the opportunity to partner with Skillshare to do it, I was like, yes, sign me up. But that was also something that was pretty new. And that's with teaching, right? And so another thing too is that not only am I teaching on Skillshare, and not only so I need to go over some of the flexes of Skillshare, because Skillshare was pretty neat too. But essentially for Skillshare, I was featured on their Instagram, Twitter newsletter, and I was featured on their homepage as well as their illustration page. So that was really cool, because that meant more eyeballs got to see it, which means more people will be more likely to enroll in it and learn from the class. And the coolest part is seeing the students' project. So that was really neat. And I'll move on to the next thing that was a really cool highlight for myself in my adult gap year is teaching. So that's something that I've been wanting to do too, but I was like, I don't know. In the sense where I was like, am I qualified, right? And sometimes you just gotta do it and you'll see if you're qualified or not. And the other thing too is you'll grow with it. So I did that, and I'm teaching kids via Zoom. And for that I can backtrack a little bit and then say another neat thing was Jiffy, and how I got some of my GIFs to trend. And that was really cool, because that was in a matter of 3 days. So with that, I created my first class for kids was how to create simple GIFs. And doing that actually opened the way for me to teach more classes. And so those are some of my highlights of, my adult gap year. In addition, I almost forgot, the other thing too was that I created a bookmark activity for kids, and this was for the Chinese American Museum. So that was also really neat. And then the other thing too is I got to create a sticker shop with my sister. And for me, that was really cool, because again, all of these things are things that I wanted to do, earlier on in my life but I never felt like I had the time, nor did I feel like I had the experience. But in my adult gap year, that definitely pushed me into exploring realms that I was like, oh, I'm scared. But I don't know, once you do it, that's what I was talking about earlier, where that's a lesson where if you do it and you do it enough times, it becomes less scary. There's still nerves to it, but you kind of get accustomed to it. So those are some of my highlights. And of course, with highlights, there are lowlights. So let's dive into lowlight territory. Okay, so with the highlights, there's obviously lowlights, because you can't have the high without the lows. And for the lowlights, that's usually when it gets a little bit more personal and more touching into relationships and whatnot. So for the sake of YouTube, I'm actually going to be maybe somewhat cryptic about it, / there's going to be code names, and I'm just not going to reveal too much, but it'll cover the general takeaways and lessons that I learned in my adult gap year. So to start, 2020, I met somebody called The Moon. That'll be their nickname, but I met somebody called The Moon, and I think maybe long story short, maybe right person, wrong time, but I probably shared more feelings on my end than I should have. And that probably was very overwhelming because I got blocked and unfriended and unfollowed and all of that jazz. And I don't know, I say this with a smile because that's kind of how I process things. But I guess the fact that I think the fact that I was blocked and unfollowed and all of that, whereas prior to, before that happening, I just felt really seen, and I felt like I saw the moon. And I think when I did get blocked and all of that, that definitely took a hit to my self-esteem, and I think it went into like another event that was equally as triggering, where I just didn't feel seen. And I think that was the bottom line of it all. And so because I did not feel seen, I do what I usually do, which is the excessive highlighting of things. And that kind of comes about through, Alright, I'm gonna pause a little bit. I think the other thing too about myself is that I think when I don't feel like I'm being seen, I don't know, I can't help but to take it personally, and that'll come into a story time in a bit because something happens in the end of 2020 that I'll kind of briefly share. But essentially for the beginning of 2020, didn't feel seen at all, which is why for myself, in order to feel seen, I will place my energy into my work, which is why you see all of the highlights that you saw. And I guess now it just sounds like a sad attempt at being seen. But I don't know. I think that's just... that is part of it. But anyways, with that, the second fold, I guess I'm going to call it fold, of Lucid comes about. So I'll give a little brief summary for those of you who don't know, but Lucid has two meanings, and one is clarity through connection, and that stemmed about because of a letter that I wrote to somebody called Letters. I'm going to call them Letters, but I wrote it to Letters and I never got a response back. Obviously that made me feel unworthy / just unseen, right? And so I think the second part of it is light / keep shining, and this is where this originates from. So for the second part of Lucid, keep shining, I thought of the metaphor of the moon, and I actually created this art piece that was featured on Creative Howl, and for that I just shared what that meant to me, which is, regardless of how dark things are, the moon will always show up. So in that way, I was like, be like the moon, even if it feels super dark, even if 2020 didn't go the way any of us had hoped. You just keep showing up, because to be quite honest, that's all you can really do, and that's what you can control. So I was like, all right, this is what my key takeaway of, my low light is. And I'll now jump into end of 2020, back to the first meaning of, clarity through connection, which is essentially the letters person, right? Where end of 2020, I actually got an email from Letters, and in it they just apologized for not being able to respond and responding for, to it so late. To which in the beginning I was like, oh my god, like very happy and super excited, I'm not gonna lie, to have received that letter, but also mixed with not so awesome feelings. But it was just a lot of emotions that I was trying to process. So I sent an email back, even though Letters wasn't looking for a response. But of course, knowing myself, I'm like, heck yeah, I'm gonna send you an email. I think after a couple of days, I was like, ooh, actually, this is really emotionally triggering. And so I thought it would have been helpful to just dive in a little bit deeper. So sent back an email of me diving deeper, just telling Letters like just why it hurt, and also like the honest feelings that I felt. And I kind of ended it with, even though I felt not awesome about it, I will say that I'm really thankful that I met Letters, and I just went on about the ways in which Letters impacted, my identity and the trajectory of my life. And so it was like, all right, if this was the last thing that I got to say to Letters, like, what would it be? It was essentially that email of like, thank you. I don't know what else to say. And just left it at that. But yeah, so I think the lesson in that was that you just never know what could happen. In addition to, you don't know how much people feel impacted by your actions and, who you are as a person. And so for me, that's kind of where, showing up and shining comes into play as well. So those are my, key lessons of 2020. Hopefully they were helpful. And yeah, not sure what the future holds. I don't think any of us knows really, but there are things that I'm looking forward to. And with that, like, comment, share, subscribe if you found any of this interesting, and take care and keep shining. Bye.